Okay, let's begin. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Honor to the Sublime One, the Worthy One, the Fully Enlightened One. So, welcome everybody on this getting towards the middle of our first day of this retreat. I hope everything is going well with you guys and you're enjoying your time here at Bhavana, putting in some good meditation work. So I've heard from the professor that you guys have learned throughout the course of your classes that you've learned a lot about like the basic tenets of Buddhism and all these kind of things. So, and also that you started out, just meditating a couple minutes and you're up to 35 minutes, which is awesome. Heck, you guys survived a 2-hour session this morning. That's really cool. Don't worry, I was struggling too. 2 hours is not easy. So I wanted to, I don't want to give you guys any further meditation instruction or talk too much more about the different tenets of Buddhism. I wanted to give you something in this talk that's a bit more on the practical side to encourage you guys as new meditators to continue your meditation practice. I hope in the short time that you guys have been meditating, maybe you've seen some good benefits to your meditation practice. And I can guarantee you that if you continue with that, you'll only see more and more benefits. So it's my hope that in the future, no matter what you call yourself, what religion you follow, or how you identify with yourselves, that you continue with this meditation practice, because it's very important. And so the title of this talk is Right Effort and the Right Attitude of a Meditator. So since you guys have learned some stuff, are you ready for a quiz? Yeah? You guys are allowed to talk for now. So let's go over the Four Noble Truths very briefly. Don't worry, I am getting somewhere with this. This is not just a quiz to paint, to make you guys suffer. First noble truth is the noble truth of, come on.
Suffering.
Ah, suffering. Really? Is that how they said it, suffering? Yeah, suffering is, the word is dukkha. And yes, it's mostly translated as suffering, although it does kind of give it a really depressing kind of thing, doesn't it? And that's where people get, the Buddha said that life is suffering. There's no happiness or goodness in life. The word dukkha actually can be taken to mean that which is difficult to bear. And I personally like that definition a little bit better because it makes a little bit more sense. So what does the Buddha say is dukkha? Old age, suffering, death is dukkha. It's being separated from people, places, and experiences you like is dukkha. Having to deal with people, places, and experiences you don't like is dukkha. All of these things are dukkha. So what about the second noble truth? The truth of the origin of dukkha. Anybody know the second noble truth? Craving? Does craving sound familiar? Yeah. The word is tanha, which actually is thirst. This is like a thirst that you're in the desert and you're so thirsty, no matter how much you drink, you will never stop being thirsty. This is our craving. And the Buddha talked about three types of craving. Craving for sensual pleasures. These are pleasurable experiences that we have through our senses that we like to grab and cling on to. And of course also existence and non-existence. So, craving for existence and non-existence can mean in terms of being alive and not being alive, but it can also mean craving for the existence of things that we like and the non-existence of things that we don't like. And in fact, there's the Buddha spoke about 3 roots of craving, and you might have heard them as the 3 poisons. Anybody know what the 3 poisons are? No? Oh, greed, hatred, and delusion. Does that ring a bell? Yeah, I thought so. Okay. So the Buddha called greed, hatred, and delusion underlying tendencies. You could also translate that as you could also look at this as an underlying habitual tendency or an underlying habits. Greed is the root of our attachment, what we like, the I like mind. I like this, I want more of it, and I'm going to do whatever I can to continue to have more of this and to cling to what I have. Hatred is aversion. Aversion is the I dislike mind. Whatever experience this is, I don't want to have anything to do with it. I'm running away from it. I want to push it away and not deal with it. And then delusion is the I am mind. What that means is that our delusion, because of our ignorance, and by ignorance in Buddhism we're talking about not understanding the Four Noble Truths. Because of our ignorance, we have delusion. We don't see things in the right way. And because of that delusion, we perform actions based on greed and hatred. And so delusion is something we're not going to talk too much about in this talk. We're going to stick specifically with more greed and hatred. So the Buddha says this: if one has an underlying tendency towards something, then one is reckoned or regarded as in terms of it. If one does not have an underlying tendency towards something, then one is not reckoned in terms of it. You can use that as an example of, you might know people and you might think of them, oh, they're an angry person or they're a negative person because they're always angry and negative to your perceptions. That's what this is being talked about here. This is underlying tendency. If you have these underlying tendencies and you abide in them, this is what you're reckoned as. So humans act how they act based out of these three poisons, these three roots of craving. Now, that's not to say that every single thing that we do is based out of these three roots, but in general, if we are not mindfully aware of our actions, then there's a good chance that it's based out of these three roots of greed, hatred, and delusion. And how do we work to uproot these underlying tendencies of greed, hatred, and delusion? Well, the Noble Eightfold Path and meditation taught by the Buddha is just such that tool. So that's the second noble truth. What about the third noble truth? The cessation of dukkha. It is nibbana or nirvana. That is enlightenment or awakening. And the Buddha describes nibbana as simply the eradication of greed, hatred, and delusion in your mind. Could you imagine never having any thoughts of greed and hatred in your mind? You've totally cleansed your mind. It's not there anymore. It's a hard thing to imagine, right? And because we have let go of this craving, we don't have this greed and hatred. So that's the third noble truth. And the fourth noble truth is the path leading to this cessation, which is the Noble Eightfold Path. Let's go briefly through the Noble Eightfold Path as we move our way to right effort. The first, the Noble Eightfold Path can be seen as a wheel. As a matter of fact, that's one of the oldest symbols for Buddhism, is a wheel with 8 spokes, symbolizing the Noble Eightfold Path. And what we want to see is that the Noble Eightfold Path is not a linear progression. You don't do one, then you do the next, you do the next. The Noble Eightfold Path is all done together. Just like all the spokes of the wheel support the wheel as it's moving. If you start taking spokes out, the wheel's not going to work, it's going to break. So when we think about the Noble Eightfold Path, we're doing all of this together. And as a matter of fact, you're following almost all of the Noble Eightfold Paths right now, being here in this meditation retreat. So the first factor of the Noble Eightfold Path is right view or right understanding. And what is that? That's just simply the understanding true understanding through your experience of the Noble Eightfold Path, of the Four Noble Truths, sorry. Then we have the next one is right intention or right thought. And what are these? What's a right thought? Right thought is a thought of renunciation, which is a thought of letting go, of counteracting greed, of generosity, of giving. That's one of right thought. Then after renunciation is a thought of goodwill. Goodwill or metta. I've told you guys have practiced some metta, so you might know a little bit about that. That is how we counteract our ill will. Right? So goodwill, that is definitely right thought. And then thoughts of non-cruelty or compassion. So these are thoughts that we're developing, that we're trying to develop to counter these negative thoughts that are obviously based out of greed and hatred, right? So that is right thought. Next one is right speech. So right speech is using your speech in a way that is skillful and is not harmful to yourself and others. You know, that includes obviously not lying and not using your speech in malicious ways, harmful ways, ways of trying to divide people, these kind of things. That's our right speech. Right action. What's right action? You're following right action now. Actually, you're following right speech right now too, during this retreat. Right action is refraining from harming living beings, refraining from taking what is not given, refraining from sexual misconduct. You took the precepts yesterday in English, so you read this and so you understand. So far, every step almost you're following this Noble Eightfold Path in this retreat. So far we have right view, right intention, right speech, right action. Next one is right livelihood. Right livelihood is simply living your life in a way that is skillful and beneficial to yourself and others. This includes your career. This includes how you live with your family and your friends and the society around you. And the Buddha does give a few examples of professions that somebody who follows Buddhism should not partake in. Those include like business in weapons, business in poisons, butchery, dealing with slaves and all these kind of things. So that is our right livelihood. And here we are, we're up to right effort. And this is going to be the bulk of the talk. After right effort, we have right mindfulness and right concentration. And you've been practicing both of those. We started on last night with some samatha, for mindfulness of breath. We've did some vipassana today, which is part of right mindfulness. The four foundations of mindfulness are actually right mindfulness. So you've been practicing those. So let's talk about right effort. Right effort is all about habitual tendencies and positive habit training. So meditation is a skill. Just like any skill, it takes effort. Learning how to play an instrument, learning how to play a sport, learning how to sew, learning how to do anything. It takes effort and it takes dedication to practice and to get better at this skill. So what is right effort? Right effort is simply a persisting effort to abandon all unskillful thoughts, words, and deeds, and to replace those, to abide in, to bring about skillful thoughts, words, and deeds in our mind. So it's right intention, right? We're replacing thoughts of greed, thoughts of hatred, thoughts of cruelty. We're replacing these thoughts. We're replacing these kinds of mind states with more skillful mind states. And so the Buddha talks about the importance of the mind in the first verses of the Dhammapada. If you've heard of that, it's a very famous book of verses from the Buddhist scriptures. He says, all actions are led by the mind. Mind is their master, mind is their maker. Actors speak with an unskillful state of mind. Then suffering follows as the cartwheel follows the foot of the ox. What does that mean? Think about that simile. This ox has a very heavy burden, and the burden is right behind him. And as that ox is moving, he's taking that burden with him. That's what it is to have a mind that is filled with greed and hatred. Right? Now, there's the opposite of that. All actions are led by the mind. Mind is their master. Mind is their maker. Actors speak with a skillful, pure state of mind. Then happiness follows as your shadow follows you without departing. Take this simile. Right? Our shadow is very light. As a matter of fact, it doesn't weigh anything, and it's always with us. So, would we rather have a heavy cart or a nice light shadow that's following us? That's the Buddha's words to us. So again, just defining, you're going to hear me talk about the words skillful and unskillful a lot. Skillful just means that it's an action that is wholesome, that is beneficial to yourselves and others. Unskillful is an action that is unwholesome, that is harmful to yourself and others. And so let's go directly into right effort. The Buddha gives 4 kinds of efforts. And he says one should generate desire, make effort, and apply your mind to practice these 4 kinds of efforts. The first one is the non-arising of arisen unskillful mind states. What does that mean? Right? That is, there are unskillful mind states, unskillful habits that you don't have. So don't bring them on. So for instance, I'm sure you all don't go around killing people. Well, don't start. That's basically the first one. All these unskillful mind states, these unskillful habits that we don't have, we don't want to start that. So we can let that go. The second is to abandon arisen unskillful mind states. So we already have bad habits. We already have bad unskillful mind states and unskillful tendencies. And I remember when I was younger, I really did have a tendency to be very negative and to be very self-critical. Right? This is coming out of aversion. This is something that we can work to let go. And so we want to abandon these. We want to let them go. And of course, this sounds very nice and easy, right? It sounds like very idealistic that we can just say, oh, okay, we have these bad thoughts, these thoughts that are, hurting us and others. We're just going to let them go, right? It's definitely easier said than done, but this is part of the practice. Any kind of practice takes lots of effort over time, and gradually over time you see the benefits, and gradually over time you change. So this is a good thing. It's a good practice. So the third, arising of unarisen skillful states. So while at the same time we're abandoning unskillful states, we want skillful states of mind, skillful habits to arise. We want to go out of our way to develop these skillful habits. And the fourth is the maintenance of already arisen skillful states. So you already have very positive habits. Keep those habits. Don't let them go. So these are the 4 efforts that the Buddha is talking about. So we want to replace old habits and old unskillful mind states with good, skillful mind states. So then the Buddha tells us again, by frequently giving attention to things that are the basis for ill will. Unarisen ill will arises, and arisen ill will increases and expands. What does that mean? Going back to the example of myself when I was younger and being very negative and self-critical. The more I did it, the more it got worse. right? Instead of taking those thoughts and not letting them control me, just letting them go, replacing those thoughts with positive thoughts, the more I was in that circular mind state of being negative, the worse it got. So, just the opposite. The less we pay attention to these, the less power they have. So, I don't know if you guys like being around a campfire or anything, but something I enjoy doing. And one time around a campfire, I came up with a simile when thinking about this Dhamma. And essentially, thoughts are like tending to a fire. You essentially get back what you feed into it. So if you feed in thoughts of greed and hatred, thoughts of aversion, thoughts of cruelty, and negative thoughts into a fire, that's what you're going to get back. That's what you're feeding your mind, that's what you're going to get back. So we can work to lessen the feeding of that fire, of these negative mind states. So the Buddha gives, in 2 suttas, gives some very practical advice on how to work with these kind of mind states and how to work with these thoughts. They are in the middle-length sayings of the Buddha, and they're number 19 and 20. The first one, the Buddha is talking about 2 kinds of thought. And he goes like this: suppose that I divide my thoughts into 2 classes. Then I set on one side thoughts of greed, thoughts of ill will, and thoughts of cruelty. And I set on the other side thoughts of renunciation, thoughts of non-ill will or goodwill, and thoughts of non-cruelty or compassion. And as I remained thus heedful, ardent, and resolute, remember those words, you're going to hear them later, thinking imbued with greed, ill will, and cruelty arose in me. I discerned that thinking imbued with these has arisen in me, and that leads to my own affliction, to the affliction of others, to the affliction of both. Unskillful, right? The harming of yourself and others. It obstructs discernment, promotes vexation, and does not lead to nibbana. What is he talking about there? He's talking about how these mind states have an effect on our mind when we're trying to meditate. The more we abide in unskillful mind states, the more we do unskillful deeds of thoughts, words, and speech and action, the more we rile up our mind, the more we put restlessness and remorse and worry in our mind. And when our mind is full of restlessness and remorse and worry, we can't hope to have concentration and to practice our meditation practice. And so he goes on, as I noticed that this leads to my own affliction, it subsided. What does that mean? So I like to use the simile of a child in a cookie jar. I was one of those children that loved to go sneak cookies, so I remember. And I have this simile that the mind is kind of like this child going after a cookie jar. Child is sneaking and trying to get to the cookie jar. What happens if the parent or somebody notices them and the child notices that he's being watched? What's the child going to do? He's going to go away, right? Yeah, exactly. And then what's going to happen 10 minutes later? He's going to try to come back and do it again. Exactly, right? So you can see that the Buddha is saying here, yes, I saw this, I observed this mind state, and it went away. That doesn't mean it's going to go away forever. It's going to come back again. And that's part of our effort. That's part of our practice. Just like talking about following the breath, developing concentration on the breath. When I was saying yesterday, every time you get distracted, you come back. So the more heedful you are, the more mindful and really observing these things, the less they will have an effect on you. Okay. And so, as I noticed that it led to the affliction of others, to the affliction of both, it obstructs discernment, promotes vexation, does not lead to unbinding, it subsided. Whenever thinking imbued with sensuality, ill will, and cruelty has arisen, I simply abandoned it, dispelled it, wiped it out of existence. Again, sounds nice and easy, right? Yes, it's hard. That's part of the practice. But, he continues, as I abided thus, diligent, ardent, and resolute, a thought of renunciation arose in me, a thought of metta, a thought of compassion. I understood thus, this thought has arisen in me. It does not lead to my affliction or to the affliction of others, or both. It aids in wisdom. It does not cause difficulties. It leads to nibbana. If I think and ponder upon this thought, even for a night and a day, I see nothing to fear from it. Right? If you have these thoughts of compassion, if you've practiced metta, maybe you've been able to have that feeling of pure goodwill and friendship and kindness, right? Do you see anything to fear from that thought? Okay? Is that thought going to cause you to lash out and harm others? Or is that thought going to harm yourself? Right? That's what he's talking about. The power of these thoughts. You know, when we have a mind filled with negativity and aversion and greed and hatred, it's such a heavy, horrible feeling that it's better that we try to let this down. So, to finish this sutta, the Buddha says, whatever a person frequently thinks and ponders upon, that will become the inclination of their mind. Sound familiar? Probably seen it in the classrooms. How does it go? Whatever we think we become, something like that. Yeah. And this Buddha said this almost 3,000 years ago. And so at the beginning, this is a very good practice to when we're observing our thoughts, to separate them and to just categorize them. It's not something that you might find easy to do while you're sitting down and meditating. I personally have been doing this practice for years, and I don't really do it while I'm meditating, but I do it while I'm just doing my daily chores and going about my daily life. You know, when I was in lay life, when I was at work or when I was doing something, a thought came up, and you know, because I had meditated for a couple of years by that point, I was able to observe it and to see, you know what, I don't want to abide in this thought. I'm not going to let it lead me down this path that is going to be harmful to myself and others. So it's a very good, very simple practice just to do. And in the beginning, it might be hard enough just to notice. If you can just notice, this thought I have is harmful to myself and others, or this thought I have is not harmful to myself and others, then you've already started the practice, and that's a good start. So, then the Buddha, in the next sutta, talks about the removal of distracting thoughts. And what is a distracting thought? It's a thought based in greed and hatred. So we're continuing our theme of working with mind states of greed and hatred and how we replace them with more skillful, good mind states. So the Buddha gives 5 methods for dealing with distracting thoughts. And these methods are something that you actually can do while you're sitting down and meditate. It's fairly easy to do this as well. So the first one is replacement. Replace unskillful thoughts with skillful ones. I'll give an example. Replace ill will with goodwill. So maybe you have a particular person that you just don't like. I hate this person. I want them to be hurt. But you look at these feelings, these thoughts, and you say, you know what? No, I'm going to replace this. I'm going to replace it with goodwill and compassion. So you can tell yourself, even though my mind is saying, I hate this person, I want them to be hurt, I don't want anybody to be hurt. I'm not that kind of person. I can just see that this other person is a being just like me who has greed, hatred, and delusion, and who is just actually trying to do their best to find their own happiness. And this is how we come into problems, because everybody is trying to find their own happiness, and sometimes we clash and things happen and people get hurt. So if we are able to replace these thoughts, you are stopping the possibility of something happening, right? If you followed these thoughts of hatred towards this person, where is that going to eventually lead? That's going to lead from your mind to your mouth and to your body, right? It's going to come from the internal to the external. And that's one of the examples of what we're talking about when we talk about something that is harmful to yourself and harmful to others. Saying something harmful to somebody else, doing something harmful to somebody else. It's not a good thing. And if we've all done that in one way or another, and we all know it's not something that is, it's not a good feeling. You know, it's not a good experience for us to do these kind of things. So the second one, if replacing doesn't work, we become the scientists and we break out our microscope as we examine the danger. We analyze and examine the path these thoughts will take us, the danger in them, and how they harm you and others. So again, actually, I just spoke about that a little bit. You're examining where these hateful thoughts will take you. You're really looking at that. And actually, the interesting thing about it is when you start to really look at these thoughts, you'll notice that your anger is actually going to start to subside. Because your concentration is not on the anger. You're not paying attention to that anger anymore. You're not giving it fuel. You're paying attention. You've backed away and you've become mindful and you're actually observing it. You're becoming the observer. So that's a good method. But if it doesn't work, the next method is to forget about it, not pay attention. Try to do your best to avoid and ignore these thoughts. If that doesn't work, we're continuing to use our scientist's microscope. We're examining the cause. What is the cause? What is the cause of its cause? Try to examine deeply and find out where this stems from. Why do I hate this person? What happened? What happened since then? Where does it come from? This again is taking us out of the emotional attachment and the emotional inside of this feeling, and we're examining it in an objective way. That's going to allow us not to be swept away like the flood. And so if that doesn't work, the last one, which is kind of a last-ditch effort, is to crush unskillful mind with skillful mind. Forcing and exerting to crush unskillful mind states with skillful ones. I don't have any examples of that for you. That's never actually worked well for me, so I can't say much about it. And so, so far we're talking about, we have gone through two ways of working with these thoughts and working to replace these thoughts. Replace the unskillful habitual mind states and habits with skillful ones. And so the Buddha gives a funny simile regarding how we should act with regard in terms of putting forth effort in doing this. If one's clothes or head were ablaze, what should be done about it? He's asking the monks. If you're on fire, what should be done about it? Venerable sir, if one's clothes or head were ablaze, to extinguish one's blazing clothes or head, one should arouse extraordinary desire, make an extraordinary effort, stir up zeal and enthusiasm, be unremitting, and exercise mindfulness and clear comprehension. If your head's on fire, you're going to be enthusiastic about trying to stop the fire? Yeah, I think so. No? You just want to... So it's just like this that we practice our right effort. But I want to talk about balance now, right? This is, so far we've gone over putting forth a lot of effort in doing this practice, but there's a balance. And there's a wonderful sutta called the Sona Sutta, where the Buddha addresses this. And so there's a monk called Sona, and he's really, really working hard and really meditating for 10 hours a day and doing all these kind of things, and he's just not getting anywhere. He's not finding any peace and contentment in his meditation. And he says, you know, of all the Buddha's disciples, I try pretty hard, but nothing's happening. Maybe I'll just go back to the lay life and enjoy family and money and all this kind of stuff. And so the Buddha hears this, and he comes and he says this: what do you think, Sona? Before, when you were a house dweller, were you skilled at playing the vina? Now, the vina is an ancient instrument in ancient India, which is kind of like a cross between a harp and a guitar. It's like a lap instrument. And he says, yes, Bhante, I was. And what do you think? When the strings of your vina were too tight, was your vina in tune and playable? No, Bhante. And what do you think? When the strings of your vina were too loose, was your vina in tune and playable? No, Bhante. And what do you think? When the strings of your vina were neither too taut nor too loose, but tuned to be right on pitch, was your vina in tune and playable? Yes, Bhante. In the same way, Sona, over-aroused persistence leads to restlessness. Overly slack persistence leads to laziness. Thus you should determine the right pitch for your persistence, attune the pitch to the 5 faculties, and pick up your theme. What is the Buddha talking about here? In putting together this talk, I came across an article by an elder monk that I enjoy learning from, and he actually was talking specifically about this. He was a musician, and so he has some familiarity with playing the guitar and things like that, as do I. And he was talking about how, like today, does anybody play a musical instrument or played a musical instrument in the past? Okay. So you know, today we have musical notes that are based on mathematics, right? When we tune an instrument, we tune it to specific keys. You know, for tuning a guitar is E, A, D, G, B, E. I haven't played in years, but I still remember how to tune that guitar. And so we're not tuning, we're tuning to a specific key in modern times. But that's not how it was with the vina. Back then, they tuned the instrument to the pitch of the person, right? So this is a person and an instrument perfectly in tune together. And so the key, the message behind this sutta is that we have to find the pitch, the balance of the practice that works for us. Each one of us is an individual. Each one of us, we might follow the same meditation instructions, but our actual experience, our actual tendencies are going to be different. A good example is this: I am, a big part of my practice is walking meditation. Other people, they might not do any walking meditation. This kind of stuff. So it's finding your balance. It's very common for beginner meditators to really go all out and really push themselves, and then what happens is that they get frustrated. Like the Buddha says, over-aroused persistence leads to restlessness. They get frustrated, nothing's happening, and they quit. It happened to me. I quit for a couple years before I came back to meditation again. So it's very good to find that balance. You know, be kind to yourself and try to find the right tone of the practice that works for you. And so we'll continue to talk a little bit more about that, but we're going to move on to right attitude, the right attitude of a Buddhist meditator. The Buddha gives what I like to call the Buddha's adjectives. And the Buddha, in talking about how a meditator should be, gives various adjectives. You've already heard them, a couple of them. The three main ones that he gives consistently is diligent, ardent, and resolute. So let's go through these words. What does diligent mean? Putting consistent effort to accomplish something, attentive and persistent in doing anything. The Buddha's definition of diligence is actually guarding your mind against unskillful states. So, and he gives a simile as to the importance of diligence. It says, just as the footprints of all living beings that walk fit into the footprint of the elephant, and the elephant's footprint is declared to be chief among them with respect to size, so too whatever wholesome states there are, they are all rooted in diligence, converge upon diligence, and diligence is declared to be chief among them. So diligence is a skillful state. It's something that we can develop. What about ardent? Ardent is intensely devoted, eager, enthusiastic, zealous. When your head's on fire, you're going to be eager to make sure that your head's not on fire. Resolute. Resolute is firm in purpose or determined, set in purpose. And then finally, heedful. We've heard this word too. Heedful is attentive, mindful, and thoughtful. Heedfulness is very important. It's a very important term that the Buddha uses quite often in the suttas, if you read them. It's and he talks about heedfulness in this way. I do not see a single thing that so causes wholesome, skillful qualities to arise and unskillful qualities to decline as heedfulness. For one who is heedful, wholesome qualities arise and unwholesome qualities decline. So, the message is to arouse energy. Don't be lazy. What does lazy mean? The Buddha actually talks about laziness as well. Lazy, averse or disinclined to work, activity, or exertion. I do not see a single thing that so causes unskillful qualities to arise and skillful qualities to decline as laziness. For one who is lazy, unskillful qualities arise and skillful qualities decline. The Buddha did say that there's one time you can be lazy though. And that's, he says this, whoever is lazy and a badly expounded Dhamma and discipline dwells in happiness. The Dhamma and discipline is what the Buddha called his teaching. We call it Buddhism today. And what he's saying here is, if you have a teacher, if you have somebody that's telling you to go out and kill people and hurt people and steal things and abide in greed and hatred in your mind, then it's okay to be lazy in that. Somebody goes to kill somebody, nah, I'm a little too lazy today. I don't feel like killing anybody. And when you do that, you abide in happiness. Why? Because you didn't do these unskillful deeds that are going to cause havoc in your mind with all kinds of remorse and restlessness and these kind of things. So remember the balance though. You know, there's a time to put forth effort and there's a time to rest. You know, you've heard me talk to you guys twice during the guided meditations at the end. If you're having pains, if you're overwhelmed, if you want to, you can get up, do walking meditation, go take a seat in the back. That is fine. That is not being lazy. Taking your break is not being lazy. Not doing it in the first place is being lazy. But this meditation practice is hard. It's hard on our body and our mind. So it's perfectly fine. It's good to take a break. It's good to be kind to your mind and body. You don't need to push yourselves too hard. Now, as you practice for a time and you start to develop wisdom and insight, you'll see that there's times where you do want to push yourself, but you push yourself in a wise way, where you're not overly exerting yourself, you're not hurting yourself. So remember, balance is not laziness. Balance is very important, especially for a beginner meditator. So I wanted to continue with more qualities of what it takes to be a successful meditator. Now these qualities that I'm going to talk about now, some of them are word for word in the suttas, in the Buddha's teaching. Some of them are not word for word in there, but they're implied in various other teachings. So what does it take? What are the qualities of a successful meditator? And by successful meditator, I don't mean somebody who's blissed out and flying through the air and all these jhanas and all these high mental states. I mean somebody who has a consistent practice, that they're doing it and it's become part of their life. And it affects their life and it brings benefit to their life. That is a successful meditator. Doesn't matter, it's not meaning that you can sit for an hour and not move. You know, this is how your practice is developing wisdom inside you and changing your life. That's a successful meditator. So, some qualities. You need discipline. Discipline is very important in a meditation practice. If you don't have discipline, you won't sit, right? Here at the retreat, you have us telling you at this time, come and sit. You know, you have a class, right? That you probably, I don't know, beginning or end, maybe you sit and you meditate. When that class is over, are you going to meditate again? Next semester, over the summer, right? So you're going to be on your own then. You're going to have the discipline to be able to say, you know what, I'm going to meditate. And of course, there's determination. You need that determination to start the practice, to continue the practice. Persistence. Persistence and perseverance are very important. Practice is going to get very hard. Practice is hard. This is not an easy thing to do. But it's a very insightful and very rewarding thing to do. It will bring you lots of benefits. So you have to have the persistence and the perseverance to continue with this practice. And this is, all of these actually fit under grit. Do you know what grit is? Mental toughness. Somebody who has true grit. They can make it through all kinds of stuff. It takes true grit to be a meditator, a successful meditator. And all of these discipline, determination, persistence, and perseverance fall under true grit. Now it sounds like so far like I'm talking about like you have to be like a tough military guy to be a meditator, right? But that's not it. This is not the end of these qualities. And so I also wanted to say that these qualities are not only something that you can develop on your own for your practice, but all of these qualities develop with your practice. All of these qualities I'm mentioning have grown in myself over 10 years of practicing this meditation practice. It's not something that some of these qualities I had in various degrees before I started meditation. Some of them I didn't have at all. So, what else does a successful meditator need? Successful meditator needs self-compassion. Self-compassion is extremely important, especially when you're starting out, when you are meditating and you're seeing a lot of self-judgment and a lot of negativity of your practice, a lot of negativity towards yourself in your mind. That's how you have self-compassion for yourself. And I've been doing this for over 10 years. I'm a Buddhist monk. And there's still some times where I have such greed and hatred and negativity in my mind that the only thing that I can do, the only thing that works, all these other things that I talked to you guys about, it doesn't work at this point. The only thing that works is self-compassion for myself. That's it. Positive self-talk. Telling myself, I'm doing a good thing. I'm practicing. This is a hard practice. It's okay. Having compassion for yourself is extremely important. And again, it's something that develops through the practice. But it's something to keep in mind from the very beginning. I'm speaking to this out of experience because I know, I've been there. And in the beginning, I had no compassion for myself. And indeed, when you develop self-compassion, you develop compassion for all beings. Because this practice allows you to understand the nature of the human mind. And for the most part, we all have that same nature. So when you understand yourself, you understand others. When you have compassion and goodwill for yourself, you have compassion and goodwill for others. So what else? Self-confidence. That's a big one too, right? You have to have the confidence in yourself that you're actually able to do this practice, that you want to do this practice, and that you can do it. You know, if you become too negative and too self-condescending, then you won't have the confidence to continue with this practice. A big one, open-mindedness. Being open-minded in this practice is extremely important. If you come to this practice a very closed-minded person, attached to views, and this is how things are, and I'm not budging, the practice is not going to help. Actually, it might harm you, because the practice is going to show you things, and you're just going to you're going to push them away. Because the practice, what we're doing in this practice is practicing observing reality for how it is, seeing things as they truly are. And if you're not open-minded to being able to change your views, then this practice is not going to be beneficial to you. Being open-minded is extremely important. Of course, also not being afraid to experiment, to try new things in your meditation. Now, when I say this, I don't mean that we should be like spiritual window shoppers. And you know, there's some people that they meditate. I've been meditating for 20 years, and they've tried every kind of meditation, and they've tried every teacher, and they have gotten nowhere in their practice. They've gotten no wisdom, no insight. We don't want to do that, but we want to try the practice, listen to various teachers. You know, you're here, and I've given you some instruction. Try that instruction. Did that instruction work for you, or did it not work for you? You know, it might work, it might not. Not being afraid to experiment is a good thing. Also, not being afraid to question. A willingness to question even our most deepest held belief as part of being open-minded. That is a very big part of this practice. Willingness to question. Even in Buddhism, having a willingness to question is important, because we question even if there's a self. Is there a self? Can we find this self, right? And if there's one thing I've found in 10 years of meditation, is that for me not to take myself too seriously. Nobody likes my Buddha. Oh, somebody laughed at my pun. Thank you. So that's my segue into talking about some more lighthearted things. The most important, very important in this practice, to have fun. Very important to have fun. Have you guys had any fun in meditation yet? You look thrilled. You look absolutely thrilled. It's important to have fun. It's important to make it an adventure. For me, this practice, there's no greater adventure than this practice. To follow in the footsteps of the Buddha, and to follow on a path that is totally opposite, that goes against the stream of what we normally think of is a regular human life in the society. So it's important to have fun with this. Don't take yourself too seriously. Smile. Come on, smile. I haven't been seeing too many smiles this retreat so far, so I want to see some smiles. Even if you don't feel like smiling, you smile anyway. Trust me, it will make a big difference. And so, you know, so far in my talk, maybe you've thought that the Buddha doesn't really talk about happiness or joy, right? But he does, actually. And this is a primary example. Again, in the Dhammapada, a verse that was, when I first read this, was so amazing to me. And still, each time I read this, I get such an amazing feeling of metta, an amazing feeling of calm when I listen to this. So he says this: happy indeed are we, friendly amidst the hostile. Amidst hostile people, we dwell free from hatred. Happy indeed we live, friendly amidst the afflicted from craving. Amidst the afflicted from craving, we dwell free from affliction. Happy indeed we live, free from avarice, greed, amidst those who are avaricious. Amidst those who are avaricious, we dwell free from avarice. Happy indeed we live, we who possess nothing, feeders on joy we shall be, like the radiant gods. Is that amazing? Think about it this way, right? What I said before, think of a mind without greed, hatred, and delusion. This is what they're talking about. Happy amidst the hostile. Friendly amidst the hostile. All of these things. This is an amazing thing. The Buddha's talking about happiness and joy here. Now, of course, this is not the happiness of pizza and video games. Now, this is a happiness that is not external. This is a happiness that is internal. A happiness that comes from the practice, that develops from the practice inside of us. And it's a happiness that can't be taken away from us. So some final remarks. My advice is, of course, is to keep up your basic practice. After this retreat, after your class is over, continue with it. Come here or go wherever's closest to you to do retreats. Retreats are important. You're getting a very small glimpse of what it's like to be at a retreat. And they're extremely important things in developing your practice. If you want to continue your practice, definitely come to a retreat. In this practice, we don't practice controlling. We practice letting go. It's our natural tendency, our normal tendency. When you start to observe your mind, you'll see that we are always controlling. We're trying to control. That comes from our craving. Instead, in our practice, we want to investigate. We want to observe. That is letting go of that control. In our practice, when you're meditating, if you see that you want to control, it's okay. It's natural. You can observe that. You can step back from that in your practice. You can watch yourself wanting to control. And then maybe there's a judgment that'll come up, right? Maybe you're trying to practice metta, but then you have ill will, and you have thoughts of ill will, and you're trying to control your mind. Go away, thoughts of ill will. But you can't, right? And then what happens? You have a judgment. Oh, I suck at this. I'm so bad at meditation. I can't believe that, right? And so you can actually step back from that too. You can observe your judgment. And the more you practice, the deeper you're able to see these levels of thought, and the deeper you're able to step back and to observe. This is also a process of letting go, not gaining. We don't gain peace in our meditation practice. Peace comes from letting go. We don't gain high meditative states. They come from a cause. They come from letting go. Again, it's important to have metta for yourself and compassion. Okay. So I just wanted to return back to the simile of tending the fire, right? So when we tend this fire, when we put thoughts of greed, hatred, and delusion into the fire, we're feeding the fire, right? The ultimate goal of this practice, according to Buddhism, is to let that fire die, is to take away the fuel of that fire. And indeed, the Buddha gives a simile for nirvana as a lamp that goes out, not because the wind knocks the flame out, but because there's no more fuel left. You're not feeding that fire, and the fire dies. Of course, that's an ultimate goal, and it's something that we're all pretty far from. But what we can do, the gist of this talk, and the gist of right effort, is we can, instead of feeding that fire with greed and hatred. We can feed that fire with generosity, with kindness, with metta, compassion. And we can feed that fire, let it grow, and let it blaze. And that the light from that fire can be a light in the darkness. In your practice, you can be that light in the darkness. That is indeed how you actually change the world around you. You don't change it by all the external ways that we normally think, going out and protesting and doing all these kinds of things. You change the world around you by being that light in the darkness, and by being that person who emanates kindness and metta and compassion, and these thoughts, these feelings leach out to our words, leach out to our actions, and that is how we help others. This is how we change others. So I wanted to close with a wonderful verse. It's called the simile of a single excellent night. Let not a person revive the past, or on the future build his hopes, for the past has been left behind, and the future has not been reached. Instead, with insight, let him see each presently arisen state. Let him know that and be sure of it, invincibly, unshakably. Today the effort must be made. Tomorrow death may come. Who knows? No bargain with mortality can keep him and his hordes away. But one who dwells thus ardently, relentlessly by day, by night, it is he, the peaceful sage has said, who has had a single excellent night. Thank you, friends.